Our discussion is on grammar schools. Are they a red herring for solving the knowledge problem? On our panel this afternoon, we've got Dr. Dennis. He's a professor of education and chair of the College of Education Research, a research committee at the University of Derby. He's a program leader for PhDs in education. He's a chair of governors at ELSS, and well known for his educational journalism, and has been a member of the editorial board of the Times Higher Education magazine since its foundation. He was previously a backchat columnist for FE Focus in the Times Education Supplement and writes regularly for Spiked, the Free Society, and Huffington Post. On my left, I've got, starting from the extreme left, Paul Cornish, Vice Principal of ELSS School, also geography teacher at our school, and he heads the enrichment team and oversees special educational needs. Next to me, we got Ernestas. He's the head of science at our school, and me, I'm Chang Naidu. I'm a maths teacher at ELSS School. Moving the discussion forward from the government proposal, the introduction of grammar schools, and that has been causing a lot of discussion on social media, in the media papers as well. So today, to start us off, we've got Dennis.
There was a blogger called Simon Cook who calls himself the voice from Collingworth in Yorkshire. And he said, "This debate is the most inane and purposeless debate in modern politics." So welcome organisers to the most inane debate in politics. I think it's quite an interesting debate, despite what he says, because the most interesting thing is the opposition to it. And those of you who know Chris Husbands, who used to be head of the Institute of Education, who's now Vice-Chancellor at Sheffield Hallam University, he wrote quite a vitriolic piece about this suggestion we should have grammar schools, showing that how they would destroy confidence in children, they would lower expectations and produce failure. But when he gets to the reasons why he's opposed to grammar schools, he says this: they won't solve the challenges and that we face and provide the skills and knowledge for technologically sophisticated and intellectually demanding work and society of the future. So this technologically sophisticated and intellectually sophisticated work and society in the future. So basically, you don't want any of that knowledge from the past because you need a new knowledge for the future. And so much of the work that you hear about new curricula, new approaches to teaching, are based on this false assumption that everything's changing. And we need, therefore, a new sort of education. And Tom Boronsky from University of East London also criticised it for the same reasons. Right? We don't want academic education, we want vocational education. Right? We want education that's more relevant for today. So I like this debate because it actually gives you a chance. Dave said, we're at a peculiar moment where you can use any of these initiatives to start a debate about education. You can discuss what happens within schools, but you've also got to have a debate at a wider, more cultural level if you can actually get people engaged in it. There's a philosopher called Bob Hassian at Oxford who's written a very nice little book which I recommend called The Fear of Knowledge. It's a very short book and it's really good attack on relativism. But he says that behind the survival of relativism in its various forms today lies a cultural dislike of knowledge, which is not interested in knowledge anymore. It partly explains why you have the government introducing lots of new initiatives like grammar schools, because they sort of have an idea that knowledge should be there, but they haven't got the confidence and they're not engaging in the debates enough to actually understand what their real beliefs are. Because grammar schools, you think, they were a good thing in the past, so let's bring them back. It's like a quick fix technological solution. Without having the debate, we've talked about it before, don't you? The debate about textbooks. You don't trust teachers, you want to have knowledge, bring in textbooks. So always trying to have some technical way. You don't trust teachers, you've not had the arguments, so you prescribe things, or you bring in something that will hopefully solve the problem for you. It's not going to solve the problem. Because, as people said this morning, if you can get the debate going out of here and into wider circles, and if you ever get the opportunity anywhere, take it. The press are always looking for people who are mouthy enough to speak on a whole range of topics, so you should do it. And you will get an audience, and people will listen. And I think that's the biggest challenge. And I say this because I work in universities, but even universities, and you could go to teacher training courses where there's a total opposition to knowledge-based education and a total hatred of subjects. It's in the lifeblood of every faculty of education. Even if they're there in name, they're not taught as subjects. And I think when you talk about new teachers, we did this morning, and the problems they had, if they were well versed in their subjects, they could come straight into schools and teach. That's my basic assumption. The younger, the more enthusiastic, all those things, fine. You've got your subject, you just go in and teach it. I did try and have an experiment, mentioned it to Bradford College, where they run all the teacher training in Yorkshire. And I suggested that they wanted to really try this. Instead of having a lesson plan, get your new teacher or person on your teacher training course and just say, right, you're a physics teacher, go in and teach something. And they were so shocked, the idea that they said we couldn't possibly do that, we couldn't cope, or our students couldn't cope without a lesson plan, right? A really detailed lesson plan. But if you know your subject, you can do it. Just go in and teach it. All you need to know is the topic, go in and teach it. You don't need anything else. It's an interesting thing. I don't know if East London Science School can let you do that if you're a new teacher, but it's worth trying. Just go in and teach it. And if you're frightened of it, it means you haven't got the subject knowledge. You could throw me in front of a class and I could teach Plato tomorrow. I know loads of things to say and what to do. But you've got to have. It's not. But then what you don't want is to have a confidence building program. So you'd be confident enough to do that. That two-stage theory never works. But if you just know your subject, and that's all you need to do, and then work it out. Dave wrote in his blog, I think, that education is a messy business, and that's just true. Teaching is messy and it's hard. And just accept it and try it and teach your subject. Now, because you haven't got a subject or you don't know enough about it, that is a real problem. But teacher training institutions do not do you any good in doing this. I'll just finish on a short, why I speak with authority on this. I went from a secondary school to a grammar school. They were going into a sort of comprehensive system. So I've experienced both worlds. But there was a marked difference, though we did have some good teachers in the secondary school, were great. They took us all, because working class area, then what they did, we were constantly going to theatre, and going to concerts, and it was great. It's like the extended curriculum. But the difference I saw when the grammar school teachers, this one always stuck in my mind, and it relates to what Anthony was saying this morning. I must have been a bit of a hippie at the time, and so the teacher said, what you need to do is read this. And he gave me a copy of H.D. Thoreau's Walden or Life in the Woods. So it's a great introduction to a great book, but he didn't argue with me or say anything about my personal life or what I was doing. Read this great work of literature. I think that is what is transformative. They did that all the time. So they gave you things to read, or they showed you great works of art. And I think that's the message. I like the things that Anthony's saying. If you give people the chance to read great things, you'll transform their knowledge, really. That's what you're about. I'm tempted to say transform their lives. We slip into these phrases, but you transform what they know from the limited amount they know to a greater amount, and that's fantastic. So I would, so in that sense, if you could have those debates, then I like the debate about grammar schools. The rest of the debate in the wider world would be about selection at 14 or selection at 12 and all that tedious stuff. But I think you can use the grammar schools to actually promote knowledge-based education.
Thank you for that. Paul?
It was only my grammar school education that really gave me the opportunity to both appreciate and play Bach on the cello. And so, and if I'd have gone to my local school, which at the time was probably getting about 22% A star or A to C in those days, I would never have had those opportunities. I always loved music. I was into music, even though I'm a geography teacher. I wanted to go somewhere that would take me take me further. I was from a working class background. My dad left school at 13, born in Dagenham, and brought up on the Havering and Dagenham border, and there wasn't any other real choice of schools that could take me beyond where I was, and apart from the grammar school, which was a few miles away. And so, yeah, I like what Anthony was saying. It's about, knowing and appreciating things that, you wouldn't have the opportunity to get in the world. And I know Michael's written on that as well. So, and I've gone on a sort of journey, a couple of knowledge turns in my career and also my schooling as well. As I said, I went to a grammar school, a place where knowledge was really key and important. I loved music and I loved geography, and in the end it was literally a flip of a coin that sent me to read geography rather than going to music college. But after I left that school, went to university, trained to be a teacher, and was sort of detrained in my subject of geography by the Institute of Education. I actually returned to the same school, which by then was not a selective school, because we were just inside Havering and not inside Essex, and actually the selection was taken away. And it was an interesting sort of story of that school, that as soon as the intake became a mixed intake and there was no selection, it went from a sort of knowledge and traditional education, academic education with rigorous learning and even the conversations in the playground were academic ones, to one where the school literally overnight turned into one where sort of pedagogy and AFL was the answer to having your local kids from the local estate come into your school. And as a teacher, I sort of followed that. I'd been trained to think that pedagogy and sort of activity-based learning was the way to go. So I took all my Ordnance Survey maps that my previous teachers had given me, put them all in the bin. Even though at the same time I was actually the head of department of 3 of my old teachers when I was there as a pupil. I took literally their curriculum and ripped it up and went ahead with this sort of, it was probably in the same time as the 2007 curriculum changes, and literally following the national curriculum, making everything relevant to the students. And yes, the children in some ways took, or more of them took GCSE. We went from 33 to 160 taking geography at GCSE, but actually they weren't knowing the subject as much as I did when I was there, and sort of the traditional side of geography, especially the physical geography that I was taught and I loved so much when I was at school. So in some ways, I went from being an academic student to actually being detrained in that side. But it was only when I went back to the Institute and I studied for a Master's in Geography Education that I actually had another knowledge turn in some ways, that under the leadership of David Lambert at the Institute, who also went through a similar sort of experience himself, was that actually, knowledge has to be there as the fundamental thing within a curriculum. And so coming to East London Science School is giving me that opportunity to do that. So coming back to grammar schools, for myself, and this is my personal view, is if I didn't go to grammar school, I wouldn't have had those opportunities, both in an academic curriculum, associating with like-minded students and teachers to talk academically. I wouldn't have had the opportunities, especially the school's 500 years old, so you've got things which have taken time. I know Michael's taught, it takes time to build a school, and all of the different things, the sort of facets of that, the sport, the music, and the arts that go with that sort of education. And so I do feel that the school I went to, when it was a grammar school, did allow disadvantaged children in. I wouldn't call myself a disadvantaged pupil, but definitely from a working class background. Especially with now the sort of the revision of the way that the 11 plus is, I know Durham University have done a lot of work on this. It allows more opportunity for disadvantaged pupils. The last thing I'd say is there are not enough schools like ELSS that have academic knowledge as the fundamental sort of thing that drives them. If there were, then in some ways, grammar schools and knowledge-led schools can also sort of work together and be there as part of the offer for young children today. One example, it just takes time and a lot of effort to run and organise a school like ELSS. Give you one example. I lead on the enrichment curriculum, which is one way in which we try and give our students from whatever ability and background cultural experiences and knowledge which is outside of the classroom, universities and museums. This year in itself we have organised, or we will organise, over 700 school trips. Now that doesn't come easily. It takes money and it takes effort and it takes a lot of hard work from the team that's organising that. Not many other schools would even think about it. We go around and tell other teachers about it and they laugh, saying you're lying, okay, or it's just impossible. But to actually organise and set up, like David has, a school which is knowledge-led but for everyone, takes a lot of time, takes a lot of effort, and we may not see all of the fruits of it for maybe, just like my old school was 500 years old, maybe we'll have to wait quite a while for it to really be grounded. But at the same time, there aren't enough of those people who are willing to put the time, the effort, and literally their lives into these projects. Thank you.
Well, from that we can see that Paul is very much into grammar schools and also knowledge-based education. So we hope that Paul can take a leaf from David Perks and open up his own school. Right, Ernestas, what's your contribution?
I disagree with both of the speakers. I think when it comes to grammar schools, we have to look at the selective nature. I think that is inherited in what the school is and by definition what it does. And I think, just going very quickly back to what you said about what it does in communities like Manchester or Buckinghamshire, where you've got the new exams which came in at 11+. There's a whole now league table of tutors that gain ranked, and a lot of people, parents, are paying a lot of money to make sure that their kids get into those schools. And it is also having a detrimental effect to the local schools as well. In terms of the question itself, I think it is also a political question. So I'm not sure if it's a red herring or a blue herring, white herring, hard red herring or soft, because it is quite divisive. I think grammar schools is probably the most divisive question that we need to answer in education, and it's an absolute social construct. It doesn't need to exist there. I think it should be abolished, and in fact it should have been done so about 40 years ago or so. In terms of my personal experience and my authority on the subject, I have never been in grammar school. I've never touched a grammar school or even visited one, but there's an idea in physics that you can have action at a distance. Obviously you will have experienced the impact of these grammar schools from my local school. So I did go to my local school, which was right next to me. It was also what you would consider a failing school. They did get 20-30% GCSE marks, A star to C, including English and maths. But I worked hard. Again, my family came as immigrants to the country, so I spent my first 5-6 years in state education. And I thought I got quite a successful, enriched experience. Definitely a cultural enhancing one as well, due to the diversity that existed in the school as well. There were some negative aspects as well. So for example, when I finished my GCSEs, I went to sixth form college, and I was devastated to find out that I could not do 5 A-levels. Due to my results, they said my average point score meant I could only do 4, and I really wanted to do 5. So as any 16, 17-year-old does, I went back and I thought, what could I have done differently? How can I learn from this? So I went and opened up the specifications, the subjects that I could have studied to make sure that I would have had access to this. And I came across the first subject, which was astronomy under A. And I was thinking, why have I not been taught astronomy in my comprehensive local school? Why have I missed out on this information? So I looked further into the specification, and the first item that came up in terms of having that knowledge, sidereal day, 4 minutes shorter than the solar day. Something quite fundamental. It really changes the way you actually think about what is a day, and really broadens your horizons in terms of your thinking. So I was quite disappointed with that. I continued to look through different subjects. Came across electronics. Again, something I'm out of science, passionate about physics and electronics as well. And again, something that I would have wished to have studied. So I was thinking, where were these opportunities for me? And they didn't exist. And maybe I'm externalizing the faults of the school that I went to, but I think what grammar schools do is that they set the bar, and they set the bar because they cherry pick the best students. So whatever gets taught in a grammar school is only by definition for the best. It's not for anyone else. So if that's the implication of that, the schools, comprehensive schools, will actually look at that and will probably deliver something less than that. But also, I was disappointed in the fact that grammar schools, which, due to their selective nature and the fact that they get the best kids, don't actually then defend knowledge. So for example, recently we had a culling of subjects. Astronomy as a subject was almost removed from the exam boards because there was no one to defend it. It kind of still continued through, which is quite fortunate. Electronics at Excel, AQA, no longer deliver electronics. So we have to go to the Welsh exam board, EDUCAS, and good luck to the Welsh today when they're playing England. Not just for that reason. So we have to go and deliver that exam board in terms of the specification. But there's something I think much more fundamental than that as well. So triple science, which is something I'm really proud of our school and what we do. The fact that every single student will have that experience. I had a long-term partner, 8 years, and when she went to university, she couldn't access the information because in her comprehensive she only did double science. She found it a lot more difficult to actually engage with the STEM subject that she was studying. Speaking of STEM subjects, I think it's a well-known fact there's going to be 2 million job shortage by 2020 in UK of STEM employees. And if we are removing astronomy, if we're removing electronics, because grammar schools did not defend them, we're really limiting what we can do as a country, as a nation, in terms of filling that gap. So I think, going back to grammar schools, they do get the best students, so the selective nature thing is really, really important, and they have the responsibility then to really push on and challenge those students. I probably shouldn't use the word coasting, but they do get the best students and they sort of take it easy. They don't really push them, and if they did, then the opportunities of those in other schools would actually be opened up to say, right, if they can do it, we can probably deliver something much more challenging. So I think I'll leave on that.
Right, can we take questions, please?
A bit like Paul, I went to a grammar school, and the point I want to make, in London, you have a choice of schools. I mean, in the local area to us in Bow, you could go to a school which has the academic drive like we do, with knowledge. You could go to a school like School 21 with skills. A parent can choose. I'm originally from the coast, water on 3 sides. One comprehensive school that had been a failing school for 35 years. My mum got no GCSEs from there. My sister got no qualifications from there. That was in my way. A grammar school, as Paul said, there's the opportunities. So my question is, do grammar schools work in some areas where parents do need a choice, but maybe not so much in other areas like big cities?
Well, a quick question actually. If you take away the selection element, is East London Science School a grammar school by another name?
The argument against grammar schools usually goes, the evidence shows that they don't really make a difference to outcomes. It's all about selection and cherry picking. I'm a parent of a boy who's just started secondary school. We've been to a lot of secondary school open days recently, and in all of these you get at some point a head speech where they tell you what the school stands for. And without exception, in the state schools, the head speeches were shambling, inarticulate, confused, apologetic, focused on problems, talked in a weird language that full of jargon, and were ambivalent about the potential of students. Without exception, in the grammar schools we visited, the head teachers' speeches were confident, they talked in English, and they were able to put forward, communicate a coherent, positive vision about which was usually based on academic excellence. So I don't know whether in those schools the reality of it matches up to that, but parents aren't stupid. They can recognise something that they can get behind, and conversely something that's just a mess. So I think that's why so many people are trying to get into grammar schools.
I think it was Ernestas who talked about grammar schools taking the best students, and I wonder firstly if that's the case. firstly, I wonder if we're underestimating the remaining students who don't get into the grammar school and their potential, and saying, okay, you didn't do that, therefore you're not one of the best students. And then also knowing how much coaching often goes into the 11 plus. Actually, I think, is it just something that if you pay enough money for extra tuition, you'll pass it? And does it nowadays, does it actually offer opportunity to those from less privileged backgrounds?
I don't have a hard position on this question because I'm very sympathetic to Ernesta. I do think there's an element of cherry picking at the age of 11 and so on and so forth. But I absolutely agree with Dennis and Paul at the level of what you get with the grammar school, generally speaking, is a focus on knowledge. And that's really, really important. And I think that we shouldn't underestimate that. The real pity is, look at the one keynote speech Theresa May, the Prime Minister, ever made in defence of grammar schools. Her whole argument was based on the possibility of social mobility. So she has a very instrumentalist defence of grammar schools rather than focusing on the potential of knowledge. Nick's last point, struggling to make this point without sounding like egotistical or big-headed, but I think it's important for teachers in state schools like myself to realise it's not that there's something in the water tops of grammar schools. We actually can do the business. We can be at least as good as them. I teach in Watford in a biggest comprehensive. It's actually now an academy in Hertfordshire. And in the last 5 years, we've debated Watford boys grammar and Watford girls grammar 5 times in this debate matters type competitions, and we beat them 4 times out of 5. Now, I'm not saying that's a huge big piece of evidence, but what I'm trying to say is our kids are every bit as good as them, if not better. And if you wanted to look at the data, or whatever you want to call it in the league tables, the predicted grades of the kids in the Watford grammar, boys and girls, would be expected to be better than ours. But if you've got a few teachers who believe what they're doing, if you can convey the seriousness of your subject and extracurricular things to your students and they believe in themselves, without sounding sort of stupidly idealist, it's amazing what's possible. And I think that we must not get, as I am sympathetic in some respects to Ernesta, but I think it's important we don't get a chip on our shoulder in state schools and realise we can absolutely still do the business with our students.
We're not a grammar school, and having taught in a school which was one and still had a lot of the cultures of one, I'll tell you what, it's a lot harder work at East London Science School, because we have to try with every pupil, and we're delivering the same curriculum to everyone, and that's hard work. I'm in charge of also in charge of SEN and child protection, and you compare what we have to deal with compared with grammar schools. We are taking kids from horrific backgrounds and places which grammar schools probably wouldn't ever see before or experience, and trying to give them the best education we can. Now, that's not going to work for everyone, but it's about trying and it's about putting that effort in. And actually, I think that the staff at schools like ours actually do work harder with our kids than grammar school teachers who, stand in front of their pupils, deliver the knowledge, and then maybe sit back and just, think it just sinks in. But as a school, we work hard, we push, we don't let our kids go. So it's a very different sort of culture between the two schools. Oh, but another thing I'd say, I wasn't tutored for the 11 plus. I don't know whether that's an arrogant thing.
I mean, part of the government are trying to do these things like coaching, resistant entry tests, and all this nonsense. I think the one thing I would say, though, even East London Science School is selective, because the pupils who come there from the families have chosen to go to a knowledge-based school. And we're slightly, I think grammar schools just have a legacy of being teaching knowledge, whereas if you're a new school, free school, you have to consciously choose, because the title choosing it, rather than just it being in the woodwork. But I disagree with Peter and a lot of other people who said, let's have a variety of schools. Because what I would actually like is a knowledge-based school for every child. Because otherwise you drift down the road of saying, well, let's have a vocational school for the vocational kids. That's what they said to me. I'll never forget them. I hate teachers forever. You're the vocational kids, or your scientific kids. Everybody should get a good knowledge-based education till at least, in my view, 18. And so I would wouldn't play the market argument too much.
Thank you, Dennis. Can we stop if you've got time constraint? Can Ernestas, you just sum up, please, your point?
Yeah, really happy to. And I completely agree with the last point. I think, so there's a physical property, a bulk property called intensiveness. So I think knowledge is intensive in the way that it can be broken down, it can be shared, and it can continue to be broken down and continuously shared. It doesn't have to belong to just those in grammar schools. It can definitely belong to those students in comprehensives, and definitely to those in East London Science School. And just going back to that point that was raised earlier, I think in terms of East London Science School kids, don't know about the chip on the shoulder, but I think in terms of how hard we work, we're all going to make sure that we are successful, and we're carrying on that pattern of success and the evolution of different school systems.
Okay, thank you. Thank you to the panel. And thank you as well.